अस्सलाम वालेकुम, नमस्ते, सत श्री अकाल। कैसे हैं आप लोग? उम्मीद करती हूँ ठीक होंगे, खुश होंगे। मैं हूँ हसीका अली और मेरे साथ
तारिक नियाजी। अस्सलाम वालेकुम, नमस्ते, सत श्री अकाल। उम्मीद करता हूँ ठीक होंगे, खुश होंगे। दोस्तों जहाँ रहें खुश रहें, माँ बाप का ख्याल करें, क्योंकि माँ बाप है तो सभी कुछ है। आज की हमारी वीडियो है छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज से रिलेटेड। सो स्टार्ट करते हैं अपनी वीडियो को। लेट्स स्टार्ट। ओके गाइस, तो वीडियो का टाइटल है व्हाट स्कूल्स डोंट टीच यू अबाउट छत्रपति शिवाजी महाराज केस स्टडी से स्टार्ट करते हैं।
छत्रपति वीर शिवाजी महाराज ने इस समुद्री सामर्थ्य के दम पर ऐसी नौसेना का निर्माण किया जो दुश्मनों की नींद उड़ाकर रख दी।
आज नेवी का निशान भी कॉलोनियल इरा की निशानी से मुक्त हो गया।
शिवाजी महाराज का पूरा जीवन अदम्य साहस से भरा हुआ था। उन्होंने आजीवन मुगलों से संघर्ष किया और अपनी कुशल युद्ध नीति से उनके छक्के छुड़ा दिए। तब शिवाजी की नौसेना में 5000 जवान थे, करीब 60 जंगी जहाज थे।
यहां अगर औरंगजेब आता है तो शिवाजी भी उठ खड़े होते हैं।
Hi everybody, on 2nd of September 2022, the Prime Minister of India unveiled the new naval flag on INS Vikrant. And this flag bears the seal of the legendary Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj himself. Why? Because Chhatrapati built one of the most extraordinary naval fleets in Indian history. And this navy was so powerful that it sent jitters down the spines of the Brits and Portuguese who were trying to control our coastline since the 17th century itself. And legends have it that had it not been for Chhatrapati, we would have been looted by the Brits for another 200 years extra. So if you're deeply curious and fascinated by the case study of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, let's go deep down and try to understand what was so special about Chhatrapati's naval strategy that he's being honored even after 340 years of his existence. How did he lay the foundations for the powerful Maratha Empire? And most importantly, as students of business, what are the lessons that we need to learn from this legendary king of India? This video is brought to you by Kuku FM, but more on this at the end of the video. To understand the vision of Chhatrapati, let's go back to 1650s India. Back then, Chhatrapati had just taken his oath of Swaraj in 1646 and the Marathas had a very small region in their control. But like I told you in the previous episode, if you look at the map of India, you will see that the Dutch, Portuguese and Brits had already started approaching the coastlines of India. As you can see, Daman and Diu was under Portuguese, Bombay and Madras were with the Brits and Pulicat was with the Dutch. And you know, every time I hear that these Brits and Dutch were coming into India, I always wondered, how did it not bother the rulers? Now, whether you were the Mughals, Nizams or the Rajputs, isn't it strange that these foreigners were minting money at the king's backyard and yet they were not bothered by these traders? And strangely so, if you look at Indian history, very few kings have actually built a powerful navy in spite of having the most valuable commodities to trade. The question is, why? Well, that is because most of the kingdoms in India were land-based units. As in, the rulers always considered themselves rulers of a piece of land and not over the seas. This led to a rigid definition of kingdom where expanding and defending land boundaries was given the greatest of importance. And it's not just us. Even the Khiljis and Mughals did not take the navy seriously. This was because, if you look at their origins, the Turks and Mughals actually came from regions that were mostly landlocked, as in, they did not have a sea in close proximity. And before the Central Asians stepped in Hinduism, there was a strange taboo that stated that crossing the seas to foreign lands causes the loss of social respectability and cultural character. So obviously, the sea coast was ignored as a maritime frontier. This is the reason why the rulers, including the giant Mughals, did not take the entry of the Europeans seriously. By the way, the exceptions over here are the Pallavas, Cholas and Tipu Sultan, who built incredible navies. I'll make separate episodes on them later, but for now, in the 17th century, there were barely any kings who had a strong naval fleet. But this is why, ladies and gentlemen, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's extraordinary foresight of having a naval fleet came in. Now you see, in the 1650s, Chhatrapati did not have vast lands or hundreds of forts under him. The Maratha kingdom was still in its initial stages and Chhatrapati was just a little boy in his 20s. But what's absolutely stunning is that he did not have a fraction of the exposure that the Mughals had. while the Mughals had ministers and advisors to bank on, Shiva grew up with village boys in difficult rugged terrains of the Sahyadri and Deccan. But even then, somehow he had the foresight to understand the importance of navy. The question is, how is that even possible? Well, as it turns out, Chhatrapati was an ardent student of geography, and from the beginning itself, back when we did not have sophisticated maps and contour drawings, he was sharp enough to understand the nature of deep valleys, hilltops, narrow plateaus and rivers. And due to this keen interest in geography, he had prepared detailed maps of many regions of India. In fact, whenever any foreigner visited him, Razi used to talk to him and understand the trends, economics and geography of the foreign lands. And through these countless conversations that he had with these traders and people from different regions, Chhatrapati realized that there was something very important happening in the oceans with the ships. So after consolidating his position in Deccan, Razi set his eyes on the coastal waters of Konkan. For those who don't know, the Konkan region of India is this region that extends throughout the western coast of Maharashtra, Goa and Karnataka. It is bounded by the Western Ghats in the east, the Arabian Sea in the west and the Daman-Ganga river in the north. And this region was extremely important to Chhatrapati for three specific reasons. Number one, from the geographic standpoint, Chhatrapati was ruling over an unproductive rain-shadowed tract of Deccan. So to feed his army, he needed control over the productive regions of Konkan. Number two, Konkan was a trade link for important commodities. So these items used to be transported to Deccan via the passes in the Ghats. So from the trade standpoint, control over Konkan and the connecting routes were absolutely necessary for a stable trade revenue. And thirdly, from the security standpoint, even if Chhatrapati occupied vast territories in the Deccan, if the enemy saw him as a major threat, they could surround the entire area, cut all the food supplies and starve the entire kingdom into submission. But if he had command over the seas, he could get an abundant supply from the ports of the south, even if the land routes of the country were completely blocked. And lastly, Chhatrapati saw the colonizing motives of the foreigners way before any other king in India. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but then for a boy in his 20s who grew up with village boys, during a time when there was no newspaper, internet or encyclopedia, the foresight of colonizing is nothing short of extraordinary. These were the reasons why he started his quest for the Konkan coast. But back then, although it fell in the Mughal territory, it was occupied by the Portuguese. So firstly, since the Marathas were an expert in mountain terrain, they quickly took control of the 8 vital passes that traverse the Ghats from the interior to the Konkan coast. Apart from that, a part of Kalyan was also brought under his control. Now, as far as I could find, there isn't much known about how exactly did Chhatrapati conquer the Konkan regions. But from what we know until now, the possible reasons are the loose control of the Mughals over the coast because of their ignorance of the naval fleet and the oceans. And secondly, the Marathas constantly raided the Portuguese territories. So since the Portuguese were terrible on land and mountains, it became very difficult for them to control the Marathas. So by 1660s, South Konkan came under Raze, and soon enough, the entire Konkan came into his hands with an agreement that he made with the Mughals. This is when Chhatrapati went ahead with building his naval fleet. And now, he had 3 major challenges in front of him. Firstly, before Chhatrapati, only the Cholas had the expertise to build the naval fleet. So although he had the territories, he now needed skilled engineers for the task. Secondly, the funding of the kingdom was not enough to create a big and powerful naval fleet. And thirdly, someone actually had to strategize the sea frontiers in the most efficient manner to defend against any kind of invasion. So to tackle the first challenge, Chhatrapati got the European engineers themselves to design his ships. Now the question over here is, Chhatrapati was taking the territories from the Europeans, right? Then how did these European engineers actually help Chhatrapati? Well, this is where you have to understand the nature of the European traders back then. You see, back then they knew for a fact that if they positioned themselves as invaders and attacked Chhatrapati, they would lose hold over their trade. So they cleverly masqueraded themselves as traders who traded with anyone who was in power. In fact, in this book by Ranjit Desai, there's actually a scene where after the conquest of a particular region, the very same Europeans who supplied cannons to the opposition had the audacity to stand in front of Raze and offer him gifts for winning the exact same battle. So Raze took advantage of their cunningness and forced them to build the ships for the Marathas. Along with that, he even sent his trusted soldiers to secretly learn the shipbuilding techniques so that he could build his own naval fleet. Secondly, for the funds, the Marathas constantly raided the richest regions around Konkan. Classic example was the city of Surat, which was by far the richest city in the country. So as and when needed, the Marathas conducted a blitzkrieg operation whereby they would come out of nowhere, take the gold and valuables and move out without harming the common people. And lastly, the building of the navy and forts was done by some phenomenal architects, and Chhatrapati himself oversaw its construction. And what started as a small fleet with 10 to 15 ships then expanded over the next 15 years to a full-fledged flotilla of 350 ships. To give you a glimpse of the same, one of the most marvelous structures is this sea fort called the Sindhu Durg, which was the main Maratha headquarters to prepare for wars and battles. With almost 100 architects and a manpower of 3,000, it took 3 years to build, is spread over an area of 48 acres and has 32 towers. And what blew my mind is that this magnificent fort has an underwater passage. Yes, an underwater passage was constructed in the 17th century. It starts from one of these temples that looks like a water reservoir, goes under the fort beneath the sea and opens up 12 freaking kilometers away into a nearby village. Furthermore, the Marathas built, rebuilt and captured important forts like Swarnadurg, Vijayadurg and Padmadurg, eventually conquering a large portion of Konkan and beyond. Secondly, they even mastered the art of shipbuilding, classic examples being an iconic warship named Sangameshwari. This warship was designed such that it could crawl through the shallow waters. So while the much bigger British ships had to remain in the deep sea, Sangameshwari could get very close to the shores. As a result, the Maratha army could quickly attack the Brits and get away. And the Brits were so annoyed at the Maratha warships that after their defeat in 1679, the British governor wrote to the East India Company Trust saying, he, as in Chhatrapati, has ships that can go where we cannot go. So you can imagine the foresight and craftsmanship that they had. And lastly, by strategically conquering the forts and locations, Chhatrapati established 3 lines of defense which kept the Maratha kingdom well protected. The first line of defense extended from the Asheri fort in the northwest to Vishalgarh in the south and passed through Purandar. This was at the core of Chhatrapati's kingdom. The second line of defense passed through Konkan, incorporating forts like Sindhudurg, Padmadurg, Vijayadurg and Swarnadurg. Both these defense lines established by Chhatrapati even helped the Peshwas. After his coronation, the third line of defense was built from Vishalgarh to Jinji in Tamil Nadu. This line enabled swift military operation between Raigad and Jinji. This is how Chhatrapati laid out an intricate framework of defense for the Maratha Empire to prosper, and eventually, these foundations kept the foreigners away for almost 2 centuries. This is one of the many reasons why Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj is considered to be one of the greatest kings in Indian history. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the business lessons that we need to learn from this iconic story of the legendary Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Meanwhile, if you're someone who wants to know more about Chhatrapati and the Maratha Empire, you can listen to audio shows on Chhatrapati on the Kuku FM app. Kuku FM is India's leading vernacular audio learning platform with over 1000 plus hours of content library with 4.5 plus rating and a huge library of non-fiction content. In this case, you could listen to the Maratha Empire show and a show named Chhatrapati Shivaji Ke Management Sutra. So if these kind of subjects intrigue you, then go ahead and download the Kuku FM app from the link in the description and use the code THINK50 to get a 50% discount on the subscription fees. And this is applicable only for the first 250 users, so go ahead and download the Kuku FM app now. Moving on, the first lesson that we need to learn from Chhatrapati is to never ever be the prisoner of your own mind. In this case, we saw very clearly how the Mughals never took the navy seriously, and our rulers in the 17th century didn't consider it bound by a baseless myth. But Chhatrapati never ever curbed his knowledge or foresight to either of them and ended up laying the foundations of one of the greatest empires in Indian history. Lesson number 2. Conversations with the right people in the right way could give you the most valuable insights that no book or website ever will. In this case, Chhatrapati didn't have the internet or an encyclopedia to study, right? But even then, he understood the importance of ships because of his conversations with the foreign traders. And as you can see, it turned out to be a game changer for the Maratha Empire. And lastly, never ever underestimate someone due to their age or demeanor, because a baby shark is still a freaking shark. In this case, the underestimation of a 15-year-old boy gave rise to one of the most legendary kings of India, who went by the name Chhatrapati Shivaji Shahaji Bhosle. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.
जनाब, सबसे पहले तो इस भाई का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मतलब क्या उस दौर में भी ये कॉन्सेप्ट था? यकीन करें, हमने किसी बुक में
नहीं पढ़ा,
किसी किताब में, किसी वीडियो में
नहीं सुना,
कहीं पर भी ये वाली जो नॉलेज है
ये नहीं पता थी।
सोचा भी, अच्छा हम हमारे अपने जहन में
भी नहीं था। सही कह रहे हैं आप।
मतलब हमारे
मुझे ऐसा लगता था कि तो अभी की
मतलब
तादाद
नहीं,
है
हमें
और अभी ऐसा होता होगा। पहले के
ज़मीनी
दौर में-
लड़ाइयाँ होती
हाँ,
हैं, ज़मीन के ज़रिए से हमले होते
लेकिन
हैं।
पानी के थ्रू या नेवी, अच्छा इजाद ही उनकी कर
कमाल,
एक तरीके से देन ही उनकी है, समझे
कमाल।
ये काम ये
पहले
इस
उस
तरफ लाए, वो
तिजारत के लिए तो यूज़ होता था, लेकिन ये है कि इस कॉन्सेप्ट को, इस एक चीज़ को कि यार ये
प्रोटेक्ट करना चाहिए अपनी
इस रास्ते से,
इस रास्ते से भी, पानी के रास्ते से भी, क्योंकि जाहिर सी बात है आप इंडिया को देखें तो जो भी कोस्टल एरियाज हैं और जो भी एक तरीके से पानी के जो रास्ते हैं वो दूसरे कंट्रीज से मिलते हैं।
बिल्कुल
और ऐसे ही होता है पाकिस्तान में भी, आपने देखा है सी एक दूसरे से मिलता है, सी की तो कोई सरहद और कोई वो नहीं है। तो ओशन के हवाले से भी हमें यानी कि प्रोटेक्ट रहना है। दूसरी बात ये, मैं ये कहूँगी बहुत एक्स्ट्रा ऑर्डिनरी इंसान थे, यानी कि दिमागी तौर पे बड़े अक्लमंद, बड़े ही मतलब सोच विचार रखने वाले इंसान, और जो भी उनका एक थिंक होता था या जो भी उनका थॉट होता था, ये कह लेते हैं, तो वो बेमायनी नहीं होता था। वो यकीनन उसमें वज़न होता था, जो भी अपनी सोच थी उनकी, जो भी उनकी फ़िक्र थी, वो यकीनन बजा थी। दूसरी बात ये कहूँगी कि वो जो आखिर में 3 बातों का जिक्र हुआ है वो बहुत लाजवाब थी, कि जैसे कि उन्होंने कहा कि कभी भी किसी को अंडर एस्टिमेट नहीं करना चाहिए, किसी की जॉब को लेकर, किसी की एज को लेकर, किसी की ड्यूटी को लेकर। दूसरा, कभी अपने दिमाग का गुलाम नहीं बनना चाहिए, कभी अपने दिमाग का कैदी नहीं बनना चाहिए। और तीसरा उन्होंने ये कहा, मैं भूल गई एक, तो ये बहुत वाकई बेहतरीन बात है, और ये वो मैसेजेस हैं या इनको ये कह सकते हैं कि वो लेसन्स हैं जो उस दौर में वो देकर चले गए, जो आज भी हमें समझना चाहिए और हम इससे बहुत फ़ायदा उठा सकते हैं।
बिल्कुल ऐसा ही है। और किसी से भी मिलते थे, मतलब बेशक मिसाल के तौर पे इसकी मिसाल इस तरह ले लें कि उन्हें इतना शऊर आया कैसे। मिसाल के तौर पे हम तालीम हासिल करते हैं, एक तालीम में मखसूस होती है, एक बुक के अंदर जितना लिखा होता है शायद हम उतना भी हज़म नहीं कर पाते। आपके आसपास की जो नॉलेज है, आपका लोगों से मिलना जुलना, आपका मतलब बाहर के लोगों से मिलना जुलना, अट्रैक्शन, आजकल तो सोशल मीडिया है, सोशल मीडिया के थ्रू हम दूसरे लोगों से बात कर सकते हैं, उनके एक्सपीरियंस शेयर कर सकते हैं, जिससे हम और चीज़ों को समझ सकते हैं जो हमारी ज़िंदगी में हमारे आसपास मौजूद ही नहीं है।
अच्छा,
शिप का कॉन्सेप्ट भी उनके जहन में यहीं से आया था, जो बाहर से लोग आए वो थे, उनसे गपशप करते हुए।
जो ट्रेडर्स आते थे उनको भी बड़ा अपना गर्विदा कर लिया करते थे। मतलब बात इसको ये कहते हैं, हमारे यहाँ इसको कहते हैं कि ज़बान में बड़ी लिसानियत है, ज़बान में बड़ा एक असर है, उनकी बातों में इतना असर होता था, वो जिससे कन्वर्सेशन करते थे। बिल्कुल सही कहा इन्होंने, उस दौर में गूगल नहीं था, उस दौर में इंसाइक्लोपीडिया नहीं था, उस दौर में कुछ भी नहीं था। वही लोग जो मिलते थे, जो मिलते जुलते थे, जो बातचीत करते थे, तो उनको गर्विदा कर लेते थे अपना, यानी कि अपनी ज़बान में इतनी तासीर रखते थे और जो भी बोलते थे उसमें वज़न होता था। जैसे मैंने पहले भी कहा कि एक होता है ना ऊट पटांग बातें करना, एक होता है बिला वजह की बातें करना, फजूल का मैस फैलाना। तो ये हमेशा जो सोचते थे वो भी यकीनन अपनी जगह वज़न रखता था, अपनी जगह मायने रखता था, और जिससे बात करते थे उसको अपना गर्विदा कर लेते थे। ये इनकी सलाहियत थी, समझे।
मतलब अब जो इनके बारे में हमें जो मज़ीद नॉलेज मिली है, तो ये कोई साधारण इंसान नहीं थे। ये वाकई अपने आप में एक बहुत बड़ी मतलब एक सोच रखने वाले, एक बहुत एक देखे ना कि एक बिल्कुल ही स्टार्ट से लेके फिर कहाँ से कहाँ था, फिर बिल्कुल मुग़लों की नाक में एक तरह से दम करके रख देने वाले, और एंड तक आखिर तक भी उनको, हाँ बहुत मतलब अपने आप में ही बड़ी बात है। और इनकी जो है ना पूरी हिस्ट्री भी एक ऐसी कोई वीडियो होगी जो पूरा इनका स्टार्ट से लेके एंड तक,
नहीं स्टार्ट से एंड तक ही था,
नहीं ये असल में ना इनके बारे में तो था, लेकिन ये स्पेसिफिक चीज़ों के बारे में था, यानी कि इसमें जो था ये जो था ये नेवी के बारे में था। पार्ट फर्स्ट में इनके हवाले से जो इन्होंने सीखा, जो टीचिंग के हवाले से, ठीक है ना, उसके हवाले से उसको फोकस करते हुए साथ साथ इनकी ज़िंदगी के बारे में। लेकिन सेकंड पार्ट में नेवी किस तरीके से मतलब है कि ये कॉन्सेप्ट आया, इसके बारे में वीडियो थी। लेकिन इनकी एक पूरी मतलब है कि एक स्टोरी, अपनी स्टोरी, जिसमें इनका इस चीज़ को भी ऐड किया जाए, जाहिर सी बात है कि
वो आप ये कहना चाह रहे हैं कि फैमिली और शादी
क्या
और
सोचते थे, किस तरीके से मतलब है कि क्या इनके प्लान,
सोच बहुत एक तरीके से इंसानियत को मतलब सबसे ज़्यादा मतलब एक तरीके से ये कह सकते हैं प्रायोरिटी देते थे।
बिल्कुल।
क्योंकि इससे पहले वाली वीडियो में भी आपने देखा था कि मजहब का भेदभाव नहीं रखते थे। हाँ, ये आप सही कह रहे हैं कि फैमिली के हवाले से ज़्यादा नहीं कुछ पता चल सका, तो ये होना चाहिए।
तो एक पूरी प्रॉपर वीडियो भी हो सकती है जिससे हमें मज़ीद पता चले, लेकिन ये वाली जो बात है ये हमारे लिए बहुत बहुत बड़ी शॉकिंग बात है। तो एक बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त वीडियो थी, बहुत अच्छी इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो। दोबारा किसी और हिसाब से मुलाकात होगी, जब तक के लिए अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।